The criminal Saudi enemy continues its unjust and oppressive siege on our dear people for nearly 12 years, plundering our resources and imposing a comprehensive blockade on our ports and airports by land, sea, and air. Therefore, and in response to the calls of our dear, valiant people for the great million-man demonstration on the Friday of warning and mobilization, and the preceding large tribal gatherings and rallies, the Yemeni armed forces affirmed the following. First, the Yemeni armed forces declare a maritime embargo against the criminal Saudi enemy, based on the equation of an eye for an eye, effective immediately upon the issuance of this statement.
The security situation across the Middle East has intensified as Yemen's Houthi rebels entered the confrontation, a development that complicates an already volatile standoff and directly troubles a key U.S. ally in the region. While Iran has been carrying out strikes against U.S. and allied assets around the Gulf, Houthi leaders announced a naval blockade, signaling a coordinated expansion of pressure against maritime routes and regional partners. The Houthi directive ordered the closure of all Saudi ports, effectively suspending trade flows and disrupting commercial maritime traffic tied to the kingdom. This latest Houthi order arrived amid sharply rising tensions with Saudi Arabia, a period marked by reciprocal strikes and public threats that have escalated diplomatic and military pressure on both sides. After Riyadh conducted strikes that hit Sanaa's airport, Houthi forces responded with a series of attacks against targets inside Saudi Arabia, continuing a cycle of punishment and retaliation across the border.
The criminal Saudi enemy continues its unjust and oppressive siege on our dear people for nearly 12 years, plundering our resources and imposing a comprehensive blockade on our ports and airports by land, sea, and air. This has exacerbated the suffering of our dear people to an unbearable level, without any right or justification. This is unacceptable and cannot be tolerated, as it is based on no legal or humanitarian right or justification and has no legitimacy whatsoever. It is an invalid and aggressive siege, with its disastrous consequences for our dear Yemeni people, began by the targeting of Sanaa International Airport in a cruel and treacherous attack on our country. Our people cannot endure this unjust siege and aggression without taking a stand. Our great people are a faithful and resilient people, a people of faith and wisdom, with a just cause, and they have the full right to confront this unjust siege and aggression by all available means. Therefore, and in response to the calls of our dear, valiant people for the great million-man demonstration on the Friday of warning and mobilization, and the preceding large tribal gatherings and rallies, the Yemeni armed forces affirmed the following. First, the Yemeni armed forces declare a maritime embargo against the criminal Saudi enemy, based on the equation of an eye for an eye, effective immediately upon the issuance of this statement. Second, we affirm the right of our great people to respond to the blockade with a blockade, and to respond to all escalation with all escalation, thus solidifying this equation. Third, the Yemeni armed forces affirmed their complete readiness for all options, and any foolish act committed by the reckless Saudi enemy through all escalation will be met with a comprehensive and decisive escalation, by Allah's will and power. Fourth, we call upon the people of our great nation to continue the general mobilization and general call to arms, and to be fully prepared for all scenarios and developments, and to support the fronts with fighters. Fifth, we extend our greetings with pride and reverence to our great Yemeni people who turned out in an unprecedented million-man march of warning and mobilization. We assure them that we will spare no effort in restoring their plundered rights and ending the unjust siege imposed upon them, whatever the consequences and repercussions, relying on Allah and placing our trust in Allah.
Observers note that Iran issued its own operational directives prior to the Houthi blockade announcement, a sequence that analysts say may indicate coordination or at least parallel escalation among allied actors in the region. Iran has asked Yemen's Houthi movement to prepare to close the Red Sea oil route, according to reports, effectively signaling that Tehran may use its allies there to threaten a key global shipping lane. The move would be triggered if the US strikes Iranian power infrastructure, with Tehran reportedly tying any attack on its electricity grid to a retaliatory effort to disrupt maritime traffic. Iran has already conveyed this message to its Houthi allies, sources say, putting them on alert and linking their future actions to Washington's next steps against Iranian targets. The Houthis have reportedly deployed missiles and drones near the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, positioning assets close to the choke point through which much Red Sea oil and cargo traffic must pass. The group is said to be awaiting orders before launching attacks on shipping, meaning vessels could suddenly come under fire if Tehran decides to activate the plan. This reported plan follows Trump's threat to target Iran's power infrastructure, suggesting Tehran is preparing a direct response that trades damage to its grid for disruption of global sea routes. Closure or serious disruption of the Red Sea route would significantly interfere with global energy supplies, experts warn, as tankers and cargo ships rely on that passage to move oil and goods between Asia, the Middle East and Europe. The Houthi movement has issued a warning likened to a nuclear-level alert over Saudi airspace, a stark declaration meant to signal the highest level of threat and prompt immediate international attention. After a Saudi-launched missile struck Sanaa airport, Houthi authorities quickly responded by announcing a no-fly zone, claiming the measure is necessary to protect their territory and prevent further strikes. The new security order has pushed airlines to reroute or suspend flights, a disruption that analysts warn could permanently alter commercial aviation patterns in the region and shift global flight logistics. The Houthis issued a blunt demand to the international community: treat our warnings as credible and immediate, while imposing a ban on flights transiting Saudi airspace that they say will be enforced until their security concerns are addressed. In the wake of the airport attack, the Houthis reiterated threats reminiscent of tactics used against Israel, explicitly targeting Saudi airspace and signaling a willingness to escalate strikes if their conditions are not met. The Houthis have issued a clear warning to international carriers, urging them not to operate in Saudi Arabian airspace until the restrictions they oppose are formally lifted and safety guarantees are provided. The Yemeni group publicly implored airlines and governments to take our warnings seriously, framing the plea within a wider context of escalating regional tensions and the very real possibility of further military reprisals. That advisory comes on the heels of reports that Saudi forces conducted a strike aimed at Sanaa International Airport, an attack that sharply heightened fears about the safety of nearby civilian flights. Tensions spiked after a Mahan airplane from Iran landed in Sanaa, which is under Houthi control, prompting alarm among regional actors and observers who saw the arrival as politically and militarily significant. According to Houthi statements and unconfirmed reports, that aircraft was carrying senior movement leaders returning from travel in Iran, a detail that added to the diplomatic sensitivity of the flight. The delegation's trip was reportedly to attend the funeral of Iran's former supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, an event that underscored the close political and ideological ties between Tehran and the Houthi leadership. Saudi forces are reported to have struck Sanaa International Airport around the time the aircraft was returning from Iran, an action that Houthi officials say directly endangered the plane and its passengers. Following the strike and growing concerns for its safety, the plane diverted and was able to make a safe landing at Al Hudaydah, the Red Sea port city, according to local authorities. The Houthis warn that civilian flights remain at risk as long as Sanaa airport faces what they describe as an effective blockade, arguing that restricted access and military threats make operations unsafe. This aviation advisory arrives amid a renewed flare-up of tensions centered on Yemen's principal international airport, turning what had been tentative post-conflict normalcy back into a flashpoint. The Houthis have a history of issuing comparable warnings in the past, specifically targeting commercial flights with perceived links to Israel, which has repeatedly raised alarm across the aviation sector. Regional carriers and aviation authorities are now closely monitoring the evolving security situation, reassessing routes and contingency plans to mitigate potential risks to passengers and crew. The latest Houthi advisory has reignited fresh concerns about the safety of civilian aviation across the Middle East, prompting airlines, insurers, and governments to re-evaluate risk and operational decisions. Yemen says the Bab al-Mandab Strait will be shut alongside the Strait of Hormuz if the conflict continues to escalate. Houthi leaders claim that a dual blockade could trigger a massive shock to global energy markets, with crude prices reaching $200 a barrel. A senior Yemeni official says Bab al-Mandab and Hormuz could be closed together as part of a coordinated military operation. Mohammed al-Farah, a member of the Houthi political bureau, said, and I quote, "If the current situation aggravates, the Bab al-Mandeb Strait and the Strait of Hormuz will be closed in an operational alliance. Oil prices would then skyrocket to $200 a barrel in a dreadful shock." Unquote. The Houthis have warned that any new Saudi strike will trigger a wider escalation across regional sea lanes. The group also says its forces are prepared to strike deep inside Saudi Arabia if Riyadh launches further attacks. The Bab al-Mandab Strait remains one of the world's most critical maritime chokepoints, linking the Red Sea with the Suez Canal. Ansarullah says shutting both Bab al-Mandab and the Strait of Hormuz would deliver a devastating blow to global energy markets. The Houthis accuse Washington of encouraging Saudi Arabia to open a new military front against Yemen.